Alright, so everybody knows what the internet is, or at least has a perception of what the internet is. Years ago, and make sure again, you always read the lead-ins, and I'm going to try to give a little view of the internet, a little bit with a picture here. The term internet comes from internetworking. It allows various networks, and let's say I'm drawing them as clouds, it allows them to communicate and connect via one big cloud. Started out as the ARPANET with lots of connections, you know, this connection, this connection, this connection, this connection, to here, to here, to here, to here, and we have all these routers out there, and we have all these ways to connect. Okay, so if we ever have something bad happens that severs it here, we still have lots of paths to get through. Okay, so internally in here, there is a group that are tier 1 providers that allow these to all communicate. Big companies like AT&T and Sprint and so forth. They have tier 2 and 3 providers that eventually, routing devices, that allow these networks to connect in. So they can get connected in. So if you're on this network, let's say that's your house, you're connected in through your ISP, and the ISP is connected in somehow. Okay? So when you go to a website, what you're really doing is, or you look up some data, on the cost for tickets to fly to Hawaii over Christmas break. Wouldn't that be nice? All right, so you're checking into that, and what you're really doing is you're just using the internet as a means to get to some data sitting on a server somewhere. Probably a web server, web access to that. And so your traffic goes in and it bounces through. Remember, they're packets, and eventually those packets come here. Then they send the packets back, and the packets can literally go a different direction to come back because it's packet switching. So that's how it functions. It was created, if you remember back, it was created back in the days of ARPANET, late 60s, early 70s. We needed a way to communicate across the country and not have any one means destroy our communications. So it was built. Of course, they used phone companies back then, which was only one, AT&T. Then they let the universities get involved and so forth. And then I believe somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s, it became commercialized where now they were allowing all kinds of people to use it. But remember, the internet is just a means to allow you to connect to all these other networks. And literally, I mean, there are just thousands of them. The people who run the main part of the internet are these tier 1 providers. And if you look this up, when you look it up, it'll give you a list. And it'll be a little vague, but it's key that they all communicate together and they don't charge each other. So they allow that traffic to flow through. Okay? And how do they get money? Well, when a tier 2 provider wants to use the internet, Mediacom or somebody, they've got to connect in. And if they're a big company like Mediacom, they connect into maybe 3 or 4 providers that are handy. And they pay them. How do they pay them? Per connection, or however many of them. And they pay them by bandwidth. How many bits per second do they need to satisfy the bandwidth of all their customers? And what do customers pay for? Really, we're paying for bandwidth to get into the ISP, which then pays to get into the backbone, and that's how it works. Now, make it easy to use the internet. Okay, I'm going to keep moving here. So let me slide this all the way up so that I can redraw a little bit down here on the bottom. Okay, to make it easy to use the internet, in the 90s, early 90s, they created the World Wide Web. Now this uses the internet. created this protocol, part of the TCP/IP suite of protocols, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which allows us to use a URL and connects us to some web server, which is showing us a website, which makes it then easy to get that information. I mean, it sounds crazy, but that's really what it just makes it easier. People were using the internet. I used the internet in the 80s, but I had to type commands and look at the text on the screen. I didn't have any nice user interface like this. The difference here, the S. This means it's secured. This means it's not secured. If you're doing something on the internet and you're supplying any important information, passwords, anything like that, that S has to be there. If it's not, you should not proceed. Okay? What gets sent? We'll have another little video to cover this a little more specifically, but HTML. It's a certain type of coding that's used to represent web pages. And then we have this nice piece of software called a browser. And the browser interprets the HTML and makes it look nice on your screen. And then there's all kinds of add-ins and things to make it look cool. All right. We already talked about DNS earlier, domain name services. So it's too hard to remember all the IP addresses. So we take the URL, and the URL is matched with an IP, which can get you then to the correct website. So a domain name allows us to pick a name. And for example, I used a couple earlier. I have a number of domain names that I pay for. Not real expensive. They should be somewhere between $5 and $10 a year, not a month. Okay. And, a little more, a little less, depending. And it's just a matter of seeing if your domain name is available, whatever you want to use for your business and so forth. And then this has really expanded lately a lot. There's a huge range of domain names that can be used. So, for example, we did the demonstration earlier, but if you looked at the domain name michaeldirksen.com, that'll take you to a website that I manage. And my provider that I got the domain name from, they're also providing the web space, and I pay for that a certain amount per year. So I pay for a certain amount for the domain name and a certain amount for the web space, and then I do my own HTML on the website. So if you go to that, you'll see it's extremely simple. And if you did a view page source, you could see that information. Okay? And that is it.